This is the Before You Read lecture, which provides something of an orientation to the final 4 books of the Pentateuch, Exodus through Deuteronomy. Up to this point in the course, we have read all of Genesis and the first few chapters of Exodus. But we will be taking a more thematic approach from this point forward, and we won't be reading every chapter of every book that we encounter. So I wanted to provide a brief orientation to the remaining books that make up the Pentateuch. Pentateuch, as you may recall, refers to the first 5 books of the Old Testament or Hebrew Bible. Remember that Pent is Latin for 5. We've already talked a lot about the first book of the Pentateuch, Genesis, and a little bit about the second, Exodus. But what are we to make of the remaining books of the Pentateuch? In one way or another, all four of these books relate to the foundational event in the people of Israel's history, their exodus or going out from Egypt. Reflection on this event includes God's powerful acts in Egypt to facilitate their liberation, the people's journeying in the wilderness, and their eventual entrance to the Promised Land. Redemption, wandering, entrance. This is the basic 3-part structure to this important time in Israel's history. In each of the 4 remaining books in the Pentateuch, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, reflect on this time. We might think about these 4 books as different facets on a diamond. They're all related to the same basic events, but they offer a different perspective or an emphasis on it. Exodus provides the fullest narrative account of the movement of the Israelites from slavery to their time in the wilderness. But it also includes important instructions like the 10 Commandments and certain specifications related to worship in the wilderness. Leviticus, the next book in the Bible, acts almost as an interruption in the narrative of Israel's journey from Egypt to Canaan. It functions like a pause in the narrative. As one interpreter notes, however, Leviticus is literally the center or heart of the Pentateuch in terms of its placement, and it is commonly used to introduce Jewish children to the Jewish faith. It is a central book. Leviticus really is a manual of instruction related to sacrifice, worship, and the moral lives of the people of Israel. I'll talk more about parts of Leviticus in a future lecture, but the basic message of Leviticus is this. The people of Israel are called to reflect who God is by being holy people, by adopting practices that make them morally and culturally distinct from their neighbors. The 4th book of the Bible, Numbers, takes its name from the census lists found in chapters 1 and 26. But it contains much more than a simple list of numbers or names. The Hebrew name of the book translates as in the wilderness, and this is a more apt description. Chapters 1 through 25 concern the first generation's experience in the wilderness, which moves from a short moment of obedience into the beginning of or a short period of obedience in the beginning that moves quickly to rebellious disobedience in the end. Because of their disobedience, the first generation dies in the wilderness. Chapter 26 introduces the new generation. Numbers ends with this new generation at the boundary of the Promised Land, poised to receive God's promises. The final book in the Pentateuch is Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy means second law, which is mentioned in Deuteronomy 17:18. Deuteronomy purports to be the farewell speeches of Moses to the people of Israel just as they are about to enter the Promised Land. Deuteronomy restates the law found elsewhere in the Pentateuch with narratives that are added to sort of illustrate its point. Deuteronomy introduces a distinctive theological perspective. It goes something like this. God's covenant with Israel requires certain behaviors. If the people of Israel adhere to these requirements, God will bless them. If they fail to do so, God will punish them. Scholars have suggested that this theological perspective really holds the books that follow Deuteronomy together. That the perspective is so prominent, in fact, that some scholars describe these books, Joshua, Judges, 1st and 2nd Samuel, and 1st and 2nd Kings, as the Deuteronomistic history, because of how they tell the story of Israel's history with an emphasis on Israel's obedience or disobedience to these covenant stipulations. Several other books in the Old Testament engage this basic theological perspective. Some, like Proverbs, assume it, while others, like Job or Ecclesiastes, seem to challenge or question it. There's a lot more that could be said about the last 4 books of the Pentateuch, and this lecture and the reading plan doesn't do them justice at all. But hopefully it's enough to give you a flavor of each book and enough information to engage the selections in the reading plan. Happy reading.